The topic that we're doing tonight is beauty, right? Beauty, art, philosophy, the way that those kinds of things cross divides. And the theme and the origin of all this came about, I guess, a year and a half or maybe almost 2 years ago, when I was talking, and I'm actually not sure which of the two panelists I actually remember bringing this up to me first, but they both brought it up to me within the space of about 2 months of each other, independently, on the notion of how there are things other than politics that can bring us together across political divides. Philippa was talking about art and how public architecture and visual art can be helpful on this kind of thing. And Lexi had been talking to me about literary traditions and the philosophical canon. And it clicked to me after they had told me those within the space of a couple months of each other. Wow, they're really talking about a very similar concept. Maybe we should bring them together for an event one of these days. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, we have finally brought Alexandra Hudson and Philippa Hughes together to talk about the ways that different kinds of art that express different kinds of values and speak to people in different kinds of ways can do that kind of healing work, because art, as we know, does a lot of shaping work on us. It expresses a lot of things that are important to us. And so I'm just excited to be finally getting this conversation done, because these are two very intelligent and eloquent people on this front, and it's an exciting thing for me. So with that, I'm going to turn to yet another fascinating and intelligent thinker who I have the pleasure and honor of working with, April Lawson. April is the mastermind and director of the Braver Angels debates program. And she is also quite a powerful intellectual thinker on her own front and has many things to say. And as you'll find, many things to ask about art here as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to the chair, April Lawson. April, thank you very much for being here with us tonight. And please feel free to go ahead and get us started.
All right, thank you, Luke. I don't know if this is allowed in APFs, but I run debates. And so I saw Rita and Randy and a couple of you, the jazz hands. Yes, hello. Jazz hands for Luke and for all the hard work that's gone into this. Yes, and yes, these are jazz hands. They show approval. It also happens to be the sign language for applause. And I would invite anyone at any time to just give some jazz hands if you're liking what you're hearing. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you to our two fascinating panelists tonight. The first one is Alexandra Hudson, who I know as Lexi, and forgive me, I should probably call you Alexandra for this panel because it's official, but I don't think I'm gonna be able to do that. In any case, Alexandra Hudson is the curator of Civic Renaissance, a newsletter and intellectual community dedicated to moral and cultural renewal. She is a former Novak Journalism Fellow, and she is writing a book on civility and civic revival for St. Martin's Press, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Lexi, the title is Against Politeness, is that right?
That's the title I sold the book under, but it'll likely change to something more like the
okay,
soul.
well, I liked Against Politeness, probably just because I'm rude. Anyway, and then we also have with us someone who I have heard a great deal about, but this is my first time getting to work with her, and it's a real privilege. So Philippa Hughes is a social sculptor and creative strategist who produces creative projects that transform society through humanizing and compassionate conversations between people who might not normally meet. She has designed and produced hundreds of unconventional, delightful, and fun activations aimed at building social capital, social cohesion, and social discourse. Her practice prioritizes relationships and encompasses a multidisciplinary approach that is informed by sociology, psychology, philosophy, political science, community organizing, design thinking, art, and humanities, in other words, all the good stuff. She leads Curiosity Connects, a partner in Looking for America, a national series inviting politically diverse guests to break bread and talk to each other face to face. So it is great to be here with you both. How are you both doing this evening?
Great.
Really good, thank you. I just came from an art meeting, actually, the first one in over a year, so it's
wonderful. Yes, jazz hands, I agree. Yes, also I can see that art in your background, and that's, yes, which, how appropriate. I imagine that you just like live surrounded by art, so yeah. Well, I wanted to get started with a question that Luke, you kindly sort of led us into, which is, why are we talking about beauty tonight? And I'm going to go to you first, Lexi, because you have a habit of being the nefarious instigator of these conversations. And so why beauty and art? And what does that have to do with political polarization? What even is beauty? I almost want to be like, now define art for us, just to see you, masterfully produce an answer that blows all of our minds. But yeah, why are we here talking about this tonight?
Thanks, April, and thanks for moderating. Good to be with both you and Philippa here. Talking about beauty. Beauty is something that is notoriously difficult to define. I've read full books like this one that I looked through today by Roger Scruton. It's called A Brief Introduction to Beauty. And he goes the whole book without even defining beauty because it's very difficult. And he says that like at the very end, he's like, you may have noticed I haven't defined this. 160 pages on this book, on this topic. But, working definition can be anything that gives pleasure to the mind, body, and spirit. Beauty particularly delights the senses, and it's what we taste, what we hear, what we smell, that brings us joy. But it's not, of course, only the senses. It's not only about what we see, what we hear, what we smell. It's not even only about looking beautiful even. I mean, Socrates, one of the wisest men who ever lived, was notoriously hideous and ugly. Everyone thought he was so hideous, but his friends thought he was the most beautiful person to ever live because he was wise and because he was a man of good character, strong moral character. So it's not only about the senses, not only about actually looking beautiful. Beauty is also hard to define because it's always changing, varies across time and culture, and also varies across person as well. But beauty, it's incredibly important because it's about taste, and it's an expression of our values and our personal identities, which of course is very important. We all have a personal aesthetic, whether we realize it or not, whether we recognize it or not. And beauty gives us a sense of belonging. It connects us to others. It's something that we have in common with other people, this inherent drive and love of beauty. And it connects us to others and the world around us. And it's incredibly, incredibly powerful, which leads us to April's second question about why are we talking about this tonight? What relevance does this question of beauty have to healing political divides and social and cultural divides as well? It's no secret that we're in a fraught and divided moment, which is why the work of organizations like Braver Angels is so important, and why I always am so grateful to be a part of programming that they put on. They do such important, such great work, and beauty has a chance to fill us up emotionally and kind of spiritually, and nourish our hearts and minds and guide us towards the true, the good, and the just. And it can help us bring more of ourselves to bear, have more equanimity, have like fuller spirits as we're able to engage on these very difficult divided issues that it's no secret that we're in a divided time. It's no secret that there are a lot of important challenges that we have to face together, both at the level of our public leaders and at the level of us as everyday citizens. And I love this line from a famous speech that Bobby Kennedy gave on the day here in Indianapolis, where I live and where I'm calling in from tonight, on the evening that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy gave this speech to his audience extemporaneously, where he talked about the potential of art and beauty and poetry to, quote, tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. And of course, he was talking in a apocalyptically divided moment. As you know, the history is that cities across the country where people were rightfully enraged at the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. But there is this powerful tradition of beauty and art and ideas to just tame the rougher edges of just life together. And I hope that this conversation tonight will be a starting point to talk about how we can harness that power for good and for healing in this broken time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lexi. And Philippa, I would love to know sort of what you would add to that, in particular with regard to what does art do to us, like, and for us and with us. In our sort of prior conversations, you've mentioned the word awe a number of times, which I'm particularly drawn towards. So yeah, what does art do?
Yeah, I could listen to Lexi for the next hour.
I know, me too.
Mesmerized right now. Um, one thing I love about what Lexi's talking about is like she's laying the groundwork for this sort of philosophic way of looking at beauty. And and it's that feeling that you get when you just kind of know it when you see it. And for me, it's about a feeling that I know and I'm drawn, that I want to like just have all the time. And so I'm always like going to the art event or cultural event, and I'm searching for it constantly. And the reason is because of this, I'm searching for awe. I'm kind of like this sort of nuts and bolts. I love talking about the philosophy, but I'm more of a nuts and bolts kind of person. I like to get things done. And so I've been thinking a lot about the search for awe and how it's like sort of part of our basic human need to want to feel connected to others. And one way we can feel connected to others is when we feel a sense of awe about the world. And there's actual social science that actually proves this, that when we feel a sense of awe, we feel more curious, because awe is the sense that the world, like that there's something out there that's bigger than just us, and we want to be part of that. And so we feel curious and want to ask more questions to understand this thing that doesn't, that we might not understand at first glance. And when we feel more curious, it creates more empathy between people. It makes us feel more connected to one another. And I think that's sort of what Lexi was alluding to, the sense of connection when you feel that. And that's the thing. It's like, it's hard to put your finger on it. It's like that sense of when you enter a room and you gasp or you feel goosebumps, like, you know it when you see it or feel it. And that's what we're searching for. And, a lot of the ways we often experience that is like through nature. Like I never get tired of a beautiful sunset, or, when I go to the ocean and I feel the waves and the beautiful blue water. So nature is definitely a place where we naturally feel the sense. But art is such a powerful way to provoke that as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, I actually, there is so much more we could say here, but speaking of nuts and bolts, I'd like to ground this conversation for a moment just in each of your specific work and specific experiences. So Philippa, this time I'll start with you. You both have done significant work, either ongoing or as projects, that is about art and public healing. And Philippa, I'm wondering if you could start us off, and then Lexi, and just share with us, what is it that you yourself have done around this work?
Well, I'll back up a little bit. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I work in the arts. I've worked in the arts here for about, I don't know, it's been a while. At least I kind of fell into it, frankly. I used to be a lawyer, and I was very bored being a lawyer. And so I kind of fell into like, oh, let's like do this other thing that is way more interesting than writing briefs and talking to unhappy people. Okay, sorry, I digress. But so that's sort of like where I started, like a framework. But okay, I have to skip over a couple things. But basically, 3 days after the 2016 election, when I was like kind of upset about the result, much like my other friends in the solid blue bubble that we call Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And but I didn't like curl up into a ball and become catatonic. I have to take action. Like, this is just who I am. And so I invited 3 people over to my house, and I made them dinner. 3 people who voted differently from me, and I made them dinner. I'm actually at my dining table right now, and they came through this door, and we argued right from the very first, and then we argued throughout the evening, but we had a great time. It was actually kind of awesome. We didn't achieve much, to be honest, but it was so wonderful to be able to ask my own questions and be curious. And I wasn't intending for a project to happen, but I did it again and again because I was like, I have more questions. And each time I would try like some little thing that I learned about, that I would read on how to have better conversations. I've never been trained in anything like this. And so, then I just kept trying it over and over. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute, art. Like, art is a great way to frame and spark conversation. So I kind of started using little art pieces, art practices as part of the conversation, just to have a thing to connect us to start, so that we wouldn't just begin arguing about politics from the very first. At least we have something else to talk about. After a couple of years of doing that in my house, I curated an art show here in DC called A Good American. And I asked 7 artists to answer that question. What does it mean to be a good American? And I invited 50 people from across the political spectrum to enter into that conversation. And that was like totally a whole new way to look at that experience of having the artist and the art together within this conversation in a space dedicated to the arts. That was also really important. Long story short is that turned into a project called Looking for America, in which I got a little bit of funding. We traveled around the country curating these same kind of art shows. We went as far away as Anchorage, Alaska, El Paso, Texas, and all points in between, having this conversation over and over. What does it mean to be American in your community? But using art as the spark for conversation. And, you know, it's, I feel like I should share some testimonials or something. I mean, it was like this amazing experience to realize that art, you know, I don't think art's going to solve all the problems in the world. It's just a starting point. It's just a way to show people different perspectives. It's a way to show that we do have something, there is something more important to talk about than just what your political identity is, which somehow our political identity became the most important thing about us, when in fact, it's probably the 40th most important thing, like interesting thing about a person. And having conversations around art and beauty and ideas was more interesting to me than talking about, you know, arguing about politics, basically. But, you know, the politics always like comes in because, you know, it just does. But once we get to know each other as humans, and once we understand that we are complex beings, the political conversations became so much more interesting. It wasn't just, you know, the talking points. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, of course. So, but anyway, so that's where I'm at now. And you know, going forward, we're being more pointed about doing these conversations specifically in museums or hosted by museums, and being very pointed about using art as the framing device.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah. Well, much more to say there, but thank you. That's a very helpful table setting and grounding. Yeah, absolutely. Jazz hands for Philippa. Woohoo! Yes. Lexi, tell us about your work in this area.
I'd love to, thank you. And one thing I want to note that I really enjoyed what Philippa said, how she realized that art could be sort of this conduit for community and connection that was orthogonal to politics. It's like kind of off the beaten path a little bit. Like it's almost like, you know, arguments along controversial political positions these days almost write themselves. Like it's so clear, like, you know, which you know, what a Republican might say or what a Democrat might say, but like it's not clear how someone from a certain political persuasion might respond to a certain work of art. And I think that's really beautiful. Like it's just kind of orthogonal, like totally outside the realm of like the very insular nature of our public discourse today. So I love what Philippa said about using that to kind of forge a commonality or just forge a connection that's just different than the kind of quotidian nature and tenor of dialogue we're used to. So really enjoyed that, Philippa. So our project, I live in Indianapolis, and I left Washington, D.C. In 2018, early 2018. So we've been here about 3 years, in a very divided time. And I'd been working in government, and I was very frustrated, I really just yearned to be a part of the solution in some way. And that's when I started writing. And that's when we moved here. I got incredibly blessed. I was blessed to be plugged into a local art center and community here called the Harrison Center. And the woman who runs the Harrison Center, Joanna Taft, she knew I loved books and ideas, and she invited me to curate and kind of help put together this rare books and art exhibit where we had on loan some really incredibly rare first editions and seminal works of books dedicated to human liberty and human dignity. And then we had local artists. We commissioned them to create works of art that responded to and brought to life the ideas in these books, and the ideas that really made our world today, made America, and made just the modern world we live in. So one of my favorites, for example, we had an original printing of the Gettysburg Address, which was so fun. And we had a local artist depict young Abraham Lincoln in the forest. He spent part of his childhood here in Indiana, so had a local tie as well. And he was reading under a kind of canopy, very vibrant green, Hughes, very lovely. And we reflected on this juxtaposition of this very serene depiction of Abe Lincoln as a child reading, and what is he reading? What were his intellectual influences that built him? We know he read Shakespeare. We know he read the Founding Fathers. We know he read the Bible. Those are three of his really important intellectual influences. And then we juxtaposed that with the contents of the Gettysburg Address, which was delivered during a time of incredible strife and chaos and tumult in our country. And we reflected on how our intellectual influences and just what we're grounded and what we were immersed in as children, like, really do carry us. And we reflected on, whether that kind of grounding gave him the equanimity and strength of character to be able to see our country through that very divided time. And then we reflected on what does it mean that we fought a civil, how do we grapple with what it means to be an American with grave injustices like the institution of slavery in our past, and the fact that we had to fight a civil war to abolish that. And even then it wasn't, even now it's not perfectly, we're not quite there yet. So needless to say, and what does that mean? And what can we learn from that history? How do we grapple with that? How do we incorporate that into an intellectually honest narrative that still gives us reasons to be thankful and grateful and proud to be Americans today? And again, like to Philippa's point, using the medium and the books and this kind of multi-sensory immersive experience with the book stimulated the mind, the art stimulated the heart, and the conversation. We had a series of public programs to have conversations such as these, to have that be multi-sensory, and again, all around the themes of what it means to be a citizen of our nation, and to live out that citizenship in our local communities, in our neighborhoods, and in our everyday. Even if we can't change the country, we can't change who's president, like, how can we be a part of the solution in our everyday as well, to reclaiming this sense of shared identity and healing our divisions. So again, harnessing this rich tradition of civic art to be a small part of the solution. So we did that twice. First time was July 2019, and the last time was just this past October, both here in Indianapolis, and they were really wonderful experiences.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, so we, as you can see, everyone, we have two real experts and practitioners with us. One thing that I'm noticing that's interesting to me is that you both have created art. Hello, kitty cat. My dog is trying to break down the door right now. I've put her out so she didn't whine. Anyway, hashtag Zoom life. So both of you have done art, work around art that is related to what it means to be an American, right? To American identity and that sort of cultural, I would almost say vacuum, or at least contested space right now. And that leads me to a question that I think used to be asked more in earlier eras, but just around whether all art is political. Because I have to confess, it's a little hard for me to imagine, and maybe this is, I feel free to prove me wrong here, but it's a little hard for me to imagine a portrayal of what it means to be American in a daily life kind of way that doesn't have some political implication. And I don't necessarily mean Democrat or Republican, but at least like hierarchy, no hierarchy. Is there a white picket fence? How much violence is in the picture? Like, what are, is it a rainbow or a melting pot? And so I'm interested in whether all art is political and how you navigated the complexities of that kind of portrayal in your respective projects. And whichever of you, either of you can go first.
I'm happy to go. I see how you might, there are obvious overlaps and connections between art and politics, because both are expressions of what we hold dear, of our identity and of our values. And with politics, like, we express that in how we vote and who we donate to and what we protest for or against. And with art, we talked about this on our planning call, that people across history and across culture have the most beautiful art is often religious and sacred art, because people adorn that which they hold dear and that which they value. And so there's an obvious overlap, but and one reason I think it's so easy to feel like, and one reason that's true, that politics is everywhere. It's we carry it into every sphere of our lives, is because these traditional touchstones of life, like our friendships and community and church and neighborhoods, these are rescinding according to many metrics. They're on the decline. And I think that we've become too complacent and allowed politics to capture more of our mental energy and like kind of consciousness. And I think that needs to stop. And I think that is why beauty has such a power and a powerful word to speak to this moment, this conversation, because it just elevates our consciousness. It takes it totally out of the realm of like, you know, the daily tweet, the daily scandal, the daily kind of antagonistic headline, or tragedy. Like there are good things to be knowledgeable about, and good things to, you know, be upset and frustrated with. But it is also important to have kind of space, just to be still, to have silence, to cultivate transcendence. What Philippa said about being with nature and communing with nature and how that elevates our mind. Edmund Burke is a really famous conservative writer and theologian, not theologian, sorry, just writer. But he has a kind of pamphlet called On the Beautiful and the Sublime. And the sublime is kind of like uber beauty. It's like transcendent, like out of this world kind of beauty. And it's interesting, he has this distinction between the origins of what the sublime and beauty. He says, you experience the sublime when you encounter nature and you're just overwhelmed with its majesty and vastness and power. And you look up at space and you feel little and small and like insignificant. Or you look up at a mountain and you're just made to feel really insignificant. That sense of awe and wonder that Philippa was talking about, that's the sublime. And that originates from fear. And then beauty originates in love. And he says we encounter that beauty there that originates in love when we watch a sunrise, or we're driving through a beautiful countryside and we see like a babbling brook and just, rolling hills or something like that. We feel endearment and elevation. So sublime originates in fear, makes us feel small. Beauty endears us and it originates in love, but both are good and necessary for and like elevate us. They lift us out of the ordinary and the utilitarian, and the practical, and they give us something different, give us a different frame of mind, and often fill us up and nourish our souls in a way that allow us to go out and have more grace with other people than we might otherwise have.
Yeah, that's well said. It's interesting too. I feel like it elevates us to an awareness of the word grace, right? Might be contested in politics, but the meaning of it is actually something that which is just unmerited affection or unmerited gift. Mm-hmm. Like that's a thing that like we all need, love, experience, like offer. And yeah, it's like it helps us stop tripping on our words. Philippa, what do you think about art and politics? And I'm particularly interested in your take actually on awe and religion too, like whether awe draws us toward, particularly if we take it out of a religious context, what is it drawing us toward? And just how all that interacts with the work you've done. Yeah.
This is such a difficult conversation, only because Lexi said about 6 things that I want to like pull the thread on.
You're allowed to do that too. That's fine. Yeah.
I'm going to be disciplined and just answer your question, and maybe we'll come back around to this other.
Sure.
I made some notes. But I was thinking about art and politics. I am very drawn to political art, but what does that even mean? I really like street art, for example, and I have a friend who we paste all over DC, and it's very pointedly political, and I happen to agree with his politics, so I really like it. But I could see other people looking at it going, that's like trash, you're defacing these things. And I'm like, okay, anyway, so it is kind of, again, it's like this, it's funny how we bring our own perspectives and frame of references in the ways we judge whether, you know, the art is political or not political, or, you know, whether it's acceptable or not, or beautiful or not, depending on whether we agree with it or, you know, whatever. Anyway, okay, so I want to back up though. When we first started traveling around the country curating these art shows, you know, we were asking local artists, so in each place. And so in theory, you know, their art would reflect their community. That was our hope. And in so many ways it really did. And sometimes like the art was so, you know, like I said, pointed in their political nature, and it was so interesting. So the question was, what does it mean to be American? And I remember in Detroit, there were two artists that we actually put side by side. One woman who is a Mexican American created, I can't remember what it's called. Maybe somebody can help me out with this, but it's a thing that in Mexican culture, you create an ofrenda for Halloween and then the day after Halloween. And so it's this whole creation that's like it's almost like a shadow box, but really big. And it was about, and there were like little cages with children in them. And, you know, it was all about the border basically. But when you look at it from afar, it looked really beautiful and colorful. And like, when you got really close, you could see, oh, wait a minute, like she's making quite a statement, you know, she's trying to say something here. Then next to it, we placed a piece made by a Japanese American who made it's a traditional Japanese jacket that you wear around the house. You know, it's more casual. It's not like a kimono. And on one side was an American, and the other side was the Border Patrol logo. And she was trying to make a statement actually about how much she supported the Border Patrol and how much she supported borders. And it was like a direct kind of in conflict with the other piece. Anyway, it sparked so much conversation. And that was so exciting that people could see these two things and see, you know, that it was a conversation. The pieces were in conversation with each other, and that sparked the conversation around these issues in a way that I felt like I just hadn't heard that people talk about it in that way before, because they talked about the art. I mean, I feel like I almost like trick people into these conversations by using, you know, having them focus on the art objects first. So anyway, it was just really cool to see that. So in that case, it was very pointedly political. By contrast, I remember a piece that we had in a show in Sioux City, Iowa, when we asked, what does it mean to be American in Sioux City, Iowa? And it was a scene of this person's backyard in which a family sat in lawn chairs and they were enjoying a summer evening, drinking lemonade, watching fireflies. And I thought, wow, like it was a beautiful piece. It perfectly was emblematic of her experience of what she felt like it was being an American in Sioux City. It didn't have any overt political context to it. And even that piece spurred amazing conversation among the people who experienced that piece of art. So I guess this is a long-winded way of saying that I don't really know what political art is. Like context, you know, we put this piece into a context of political art. Maybe it's overtly political. You know, this is like the beauty of art. Like we make of it what we want. And anyway, I have like all these other little tales of like, once we took it out, once we even evolved from, I shouldn't say evolved, but we started expanding the art experience we were giving people beyond just visual art, using poetry, using music, theater, all the different art forms, not only as ways of presenting ideas, but allowing people to participate in those expressions, so that not only were the artists giving their views, but allowing people to express themselves in all these different modalities that made sense for them.
Wonderful. Yes, jazz hands, absolutely. Also, I just love your energy, Philippa. Just the enthusiasm is like bursting out of the screen. It's beautiful. I could tell. And people, and yes. And I love that you're integrating poetry. That's my my first love in terms of art. So I'll have to ask you more about that soon. Yeah, got some poetry fans. I like that. But I want to just for a second push a little bit, and we talked about this. This began to come up in our pre-conversation, but I think let's pull it out in full here. Beauty and art, of course, are wonderful, elevating things, but they also can be used to divide us, right, and mislead us. Some of the best art, arguably, and most persuasive is heavily political. Sometimes even explicitly, it's propaganda, right? And I'm interested in how do we deal with that? How do we think about that when art is, yeah, at minimum, we can say it divides us. I think it also, though, can like actively mislead us, actively misportray things. And people can bond over not necessarily the highest parts of themselves. So have you seen that? What do you think we should do about that?
Yeah, there's this sort of inherent information asymmetry. Like the book of Samuel in Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament says, man looks at the outward appearance, but only the Lord looks at the heart. Like we only can go by what we see, what we hear, what we smell, like that. Like, again, to beauty kind of being this thing that does engage our senses. But what happens when appearance is not reality? Some of my favorite examples are like a Bond villain who's very, suave and debonair, and polished, but is trying to end the world in some way. Or some other important examples from Charles Dickens, Uriah Heep. He's conniving and smarmy and pretends to be David Copperfield's friend, but he's actually undermining him the entire time. Same with Iago from Shakespeare's Othello, pretends to be Othello's friend to his face and is actually trying to undermine him. And so what do we do when appearances don't match on reality, or when beauty can divide us or deceive us? I mean, it's a really interesting question. In kind of traditional Platonic aesthetics, like there is a unity in beauty, goodness, and truth. So when beauty is not truthful or good, then that's not true beauty. And I think we just have to grapple and accept the fact that our senses are imperfect. Our senses fail us. The things we see, hear, smell, they're not always going to be perfectly accurate, stimulus receptors of information about the world around us. And so I think we need to have humility about that, and also kind of wisdom and discernment too. And not just, not purely trust our senses, but what does our mind, what does our heart say? What happens when how do we respond when we see this sort of disconnect between what we see and what we experience? Someone looks like they're, or appears to be a really good person, but then they do something or say something that reveals that they lack integrity. They stab someone in the back. And then how do we incorporate that information into our lives without overreacting and then assuming everyone's out to get us, no one's trustworthy, and we can never trust our senses, and all beauty is just, deceitful and bad. So I think just try to have discernment and wisdom about that. And I'm really interested, April, in your question about this dualism of beauty. On one hand, it can unite us. We talked about the humanizing element of beauty and art, that it connects. It's something we all share. We all have taste. We all have aesthetic, and there are certain timeless aspects of beauty that people across time and place have been drawn to. And there are still works of art from thousands of years ago across culture that we still find beautiful today for a reason. It speaks to something continuous and universally human in us, which is it's good and has a healing effect. But what about when beauty divides? And what I'm thinking of is, like we were talking about a moment ago, we all have taste, we all have aesthetic preferences, and we all think pretty highly of ourselves. We think that we're pretty sophisticated and refined, and we're in a democracy. It's not really nice to judge people according to taste and say, oh, well, my tastes are better than yours, but we all do it. We all implicitly, we're like, I think I have great taste. This person has different tastes than I do. It could be interior decor. It could be landscape. It could be how people dress. These are all expressions of our taste and our individuality and our identity, that when people have make different choices in those ways than us, it's easy for us to put more meaning into that than we actually should. You know, someone has different tastes than me, therefore they're worse, they're lesser, they're morally inferior, they're socially, they're culturally inferior. And we you know, this is a reality that we all, it's just a part of being human, that we like to constantly find reasons to elevate ourselves and make ourselves feel better than other people. And the question becomes, how do we stop ourselves from doing that? How do we, and I should add, like on a macro level and like from a historical perspective, it's that exact kind of reasoning that has justified slavery and colonialism. Like, I think that we just have to reiterate over and over again to ourselves and as a culture that difference doesn't mean better or worse. Like sometimes it's just different. And so how do we account for differences in taste and preferences and you know, recognizing that, again, not everyone is us. Not everyone's going to have the same tastes and preferences in us. And that's perfectly okay. And in fact, that's like the beautiful part of being human. There's the infinite complexity and diversity of beauty and self-expression and the human personality. Like that's just, and that like embrace that as a wonderful thing and see those differences as an opportunity and not as, you know, threats that, oh, because someone thinks differently than me, maybe I'm not okay. And maybe that reflects poorly on me. So kind of just reframing how we approach and think about differences in taste and just call them like those are differences in taste and they're not differences in morality. It's you know, choosing to just dress a certain way or having a different taste in your your front yard or something like that, lawn ornament. It's not, don't imbue like moral significance then that when you shouldn't, when it's just a difference in taste.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, jazz hands, I agree. Philippa, your thoughts, and then I want to add one thing on that. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, it is interesting about the difference in taste and the sense of humility. And the art world is not built for, I mean, the art world is, you know, this place where it is a judgmental place and it is intimidating. And, you know, a lot of one of the most common questions people ask me, as you know, around here in the DC art scene is, you know, they'll say, well, I'm not really that familiar with art. I'm not that good, you know, whatever. What should I wear to this art opening? And I always find that question so fascinating because like people are so scared and intimidated about art that they don't even know what to wear to an opening. And so so that's sort of been outside of my sort of bridge building depolarization work. You know, one of my deepest, longest held goals in the art world is to sort of make it accessible. I hate to use that much used term, but like make it more accessible to people, because we should all have the ability, you know, we should all have access to this thing that, you know, that you and I and Lexi know is so, you know, good for us. And I just, you know, I'm worried that sometimes I'm worried sometimes that when we talk about art and its power and whatever, it can actually turn people off, that it can actually make people feel like this is not for them. And so I don't know, I still struggle with that. You know, the art world also can be sort of, at least, you know, most artists I meet are sort of lefty kind of people. And so there isn't actually a lot of diversity of ideological thought there. And that's very frustrating to me. Like a lot of times in the art world, we talk about, you know, we need more diversity, you know, equity and inclusion in the art world and the museums, whatever, but they never mean ideological diversity. So, and that's very frustrating to me. So I guess what I'm saying is like art, I said it earlier, art isn't going to solve all the problems because art isn't perfect. The art world reflects the real world, the imperfections of the real world. And so if we can open the problems that we have to deal with in the art world are the same problems that we have to deal with in the greater world. So I don't know, that was sort of a convoluted answer because I'm still very much struggling with like how to talk about art in a way that doesn't make people feel intimidated by it. Basically, it's not inherently open.
Totally. I feel like there's this weird thing, where like if it's capital A art, then like, ooh, I don't know if I certainly don't know enough for that. I'm not sophisticated enough or whatever. When in fact, like art is absolutely a part of everybody. Like, you can see that in teenagers' music, let alone like in, you know, little kids' figure. But it's absolutely in all of us. One thing I've been thinking about. What? No, please.
I mean, I just have this, I have a whole other rant about, like the way the art elite like they maintain a system to make it impossible for people. They actually are trying to like keep people from it. And so, that's just something that I'm really trying to like smash that system of like keeping people, like, why are we keeping people out of this? Like, why are we making it harder for people to do this? So
fight the art man.
That is being maintained by the man, by the art man. Exactly.
Good. Well, yeah, keep on fighting the good fight. Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about related to this art and, beauty and division piece is just, so most of you, I guess this was in my intro or whatever, know that I run the debates program at Braver Angels. And the reason I do that is that I went through a similar thing in college, a similar debates world that was the most intellectually and sort of a deeply like formative experience for me on a soul level. And that's partly because I got to experience beautiful ideas, what I would say are like beautiful ideas. And there's a sensation almost that comes of opening. Emily Dickinson has this quote about how genius is when you feel like the top of your head has been cut off and your mind is just open to the universe. And like there's and yet, right, ideas obviously, basically the thing I've come to believe is that there is, for any idea that someone's in love with, I have a friend who is considering starting a podcast for Brave Angels called Politics, a Love Story, in which she asks people to explain what they're in love with that makes them believe what they believe. And I think that's actually a really insightful way to look at it, because most of us are as animated by, inspiration is ultimately about falling in love. That's like the sensation of falling in love in some ways. And so, and yet, right, like to your point, Lexi, about colonialism and slavery, like the old South, the antebellum South is an enormously, like any portrayal of the antebellum South that does not account for its beauty and for its elegance is missing something. And similarly, and so I think that, well, my thesis basically, and you all can ask questions that explain why this is wrong, or you two can tell me why I'm wrong, but is that any idea someone's in love with has an element, a kernel of real beauty in it. So I think the antebellum South did have elegance and did have certain very beautiful things. They were not worth what it was based on, but I do think that there was something very beautiful there around refinement and custom and long traditions. Similarly, I actually first thought about this to try to understand communism and how people could fall in love with that. And I, just because I have never been drawn to it, but I think there's real beauty in the idea that we could have a society where goods are distributed based on what people need. And the idea that all people are equal and all are deserving. And therefore that, yeah, I just, and of course I could be in love with that. Any of us could. And so I think that part of how beauty leads, and it can lead us in one direction or another. And like the rest is discernment, right? Like to your point, Lexi, about how we get to figure out, and I sure hope we will succeed at discerning whether the kernel is beautiful or whether the whole thing is beautiful. And if not, if there's a way to keep the kernel and refine out the impurities. But I just think that politics and beauty are deeply intertwined, and in a way that is ultimately for the good. It's just that misleading is always also totally possible. So I'd like to now invite our audience members to go ahead and start thinking of some questions, and go ahead and we're going to do questions via Zoom, raising your Zoom hand. And just to remind you that there's a button at the bottom of your screen if you're on a PC or a laptop. And also feel free to chat Luke or Elizabeth or Dennis, any of the people who have ZEM in their names. If you have a trouble finding that, or you want to ask a question. You've already been thinking of questions. This is great. Okay, let's start with Mimi.
Thank you, April. So I enjoyed so much your back and forth discussion. I have two questions. The first question more for Philippa. At beginning, she emphasized a lot art for beauty, right? It seems to me like you escape from the troubled reality to a non-political transcendental beauty sublime. Where is it? So is art only for beauty or not? You think about Picasso's Guernica, the wall, it's cubism. It's not beautiful, but it's so enduring and impact you forever, right? So the first question is art only for beauty or for expression? So the second question for both speakers, actually, you see, Peter Max is a quintessential American painter, right? Peter Max, I'm a big fan of him. He painted Statue of Liberty, I don't know how many times, infinite times. And then he's not American. He's a German. He was German and then became American because he painted so many American themes. So if you go back to April's question, how the art portrays, how to be American through art. And I think Peter Max, being a non-American, he painted more Americanly than many Americans, right? So the thing is, so there comes my second question: is art for pleasure or is art for politics? Pleasure or politics? So the first question is art only for pleasure? This for beauty. The second question is art for politics or for pleasure?
All right. So we're gonna, Philippa, you should take the first one, and then Lexi, take a stab at the second.
Well, I'll think about it in terms of Guernica. I saw Guernica once, and it's enormous, and it actually is quite beautiful, and it actually inspired a sense of awe. And partly because of its size. In fact, the social science says that size matters. Anyway, and so I don't think it was it actually was a beautiful piece, and that is why it had the impact that it did. It wasn't just the depiction of the atrocities of the Spanish War, the Spanish Civil War. It was literally a beautiful piece. So in that sense, it was both beautiful and an expression. And so I don't think it's an either or. It can be both. And so I can't, that's the only way I can answer that question, is it can be both. We don't have to choose.
All right. And then, Lexi, on pleasure versus politics.
I just want to add one more thing about art, the duality. Like, what is the purpose of art for beauty, or alone, or beyond that? And I mean, I'm thinking of like the crucifixion, like, right? It's grotesque, it's obscene, it's challenging. And I think that's what art, and the crucifixion is one of the most depicted forms of art in human history. And it can be beautiful, but it's meant to be challenging, to like challenge and convict. And I think that art can inspire that way, but it can also just kind of cultivate different emotions as well, in confronting us with obscenity, by insulting us, with vulgarity even sometimes. So really appreciated that question. And then art for pleasure or for politics? I think art is for the human being. Cultivating beauty is something that only human beings do. Like, we're not aware of other species that they will make a home for themselves. Like, beavers will make a dam, but they won't they won't decorate it. They won't go above and beyond to make it beautiful, make it an oasis. But we care about that. We care about cultivating beauty in our everyday and everyday aesthetics. And because, again, it's about the self-expression, about our personality, about our identity. And that's pleasurable. It's about stimulating our senses and engaging our hearts and minds, and making our everyday just a little bit better in a very hard world. Life is difficult. And politics, I would say, is the same. Again, it's an expression of our values, and capable of also being noble and beautiful, and also capable of being obscene and grotesque and ugly. Just like I think both art and politics are an extension of our humanity. And so we will get the best and the worst in both.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, well answered. By the way, just a few small reminders, and Mimi, you did this right, so this isn't a comment on how you asked, but I would just remind everybody to ask actual questions, and if you have an insight you want to share, put it in the form of a question. Otherwise, I'll have to be like, what is your question? Also, just because we have so many, I can already see so many hands that want to get in. We're not going to do like responses to answers by speakers. We're just going to like go question, answer like that. So pretty obvious, just worth reminding people, because I know we all get excited about this. So next, I think the next hand I saw was Rita Chisholm. Go ahead.
Thank you. My question my comment in the form of a question is, what strikes me as I was thinking about it is that sometimes beauty takes years to be recognized in a particular piece of art. You know, at 20 years old, I might look at it and not see the beauty that's there until I've had certain life experience. And then I come back and I think, wow, it's kind of like, you know, reading between the lines when I didn't know how to read between the lines before. So is that an aspect of art that you would agree with?
I'll just jump in and say yes. and kind of the corollary to that is I've bought pieces of art when I was 20 that I look at now like, oh, what was I thinking? You know, so it goes kind of both ways. But yeah, you know, I kind of also, Rita, goes back to something that both Lexi and I have like really focused on, is like sort of the complexity, and like this idea that, you know, we become more complex as we grow older, or as we learn, as we pull in different knowledge. And so we should see things differently. We should be pulling in different knowledge that we've gained. And in fact, this is something we talked about in our pre-conversation with April. But you know, this idea, I've read this really great book called Range, and it talks about how sort of the people who have the greatest spectrum of skills and experiences are more likely to be like the best problem solvers, because, you know, they can look at things from different ways. Like people who are experts and can only see things in one specific way are the least good problem solvers. Anyway, and so I guess it just kind of like makes me think about that with your question, in terms of like, as we gain more knowledge and experience, we just should naturally look at everything differently and appreciate things differently, including art.
Totally. Yes, very good. Let's go to Corey Wilson. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for everyone, Braver Angels, but to our speakers. And I guess my questions, primarily, I want to thank you for mentioning Sublime and the Romantic poets and their viewpoints on what art is, and, you know, the beauty and fear, right? Like something awe-inspiring. And I just kind of wonder whether we can separate, like, how do you feel about the separation of art and artist? Where are we at?
All right. Lexi, you want to take a crack at that, or?
Yeah, so I was revisiting a famous essay called On the Sublime by Longinus, who is a 1st century Roman citizen. And in this essay on the Sublime, he talks about how to create beautiful art, you first have to immerse yourself in beauty. And how do you do that? You encounter great minds and you immerse yourself in beauty. You spend time in nature. You spend your time around other beautiful people, but you basically focus on cultivating the soul and the character and orienting the loves. And then you create out of that solid inner moral core, because it's true. It is difficult. Like, where does the artist begin and end? Where does the artist begin, the artist end? You know what I'm saying? And I mean, there was an interesting essay in, I think it was the what's that famous I'm just blanking right now, the famous Parisian that Simone de Beauvoir started. Someone help me here. Anyway, the Parisian or something like that, I can't remember. But it was on what do we do with the art of monstrous men? And it talked about people like Picasso or Sartre, like people who did beautiful things or created beautiful work, but, you know, beat their wives or cheated on their spouses or something like that. We're just like not good people. What do we do with that? How do we separate that? Does that negate the beauty that they've been that they've created, like the lack of their inner moral character, their inner goodness? Does that mean we shouldn't try and learn from it and study it and benefit it and maybe take what good, you know, is there out of their lives and legacy, even though they weren't good people? And I guess we could get to the question of like, what does it even mean to be a good person? And in a past conversation, our last conversation on friendship, I suggested this idea that I'm experimenting with my book on unbundling people, like seeing the part in light of the whole, like seeing the undesirable parts of people, like, you know, things that we've done or said that we're not proud of, but in light of the whole, like being the irreducible dignity and worth and the beauty of the human person, the human personality. So that's just an idea I'm trying to unpack in our book and my book as we're in a moment of, you know, where we do define people by their worst moment, that like, you know, something they do or say is all of a sudden a rationale to end their life and make sure they never do anything publicly or say anything publicly again. And I'm not sure that's the kind of society or world that any of us want to live in, where we want to be judged by us at our worst moment, or, you know, lapse in judgment. So anyway, back to the Sublime, back to Longinus, back to where the artist ends and the art begins. I think that creating a more beautiful world starts with immersing ourselves in beauty. That's part of why with Civic Renaissance, I care so much about creating this sort of oasis to kind of reflect on big ideas and the great conversation and reflect on beauty, things like beauty, just to, again, nourish our souls, fill us up, and just cultivate that sense of who we are outside of the kind of quotidian distractions that there are no end of in our everyday modern world. And I think that's where cultural change can begin. April and I have this plan to start a renaissance in our country, and I think it starts with people choosing to create beauty in their everyday, and that starts by filling yourself with beauty in your everyday as well.
Well said.
May I add something real quick? Corey.
Oh, sure.
Well, Corey reminded me that I write this little blog, and it's called Art is Fear. And, you know, I've been thinking about how art is, I mean, it's kind of therapeutic. It's like, it is a way for me to process fear and struggle, and then hopefully create something beautiful from those struggles, that struggle to understand not only the world that around me, the difficulties in the world, but the struggles within myself. And so I find that that's true for many artists, is that their art is based on those struggles, those inner struggles. And it's not just my personal struggle, but like, how is my personal struggle related to the universe, to all humanity? We're not alone. We don't have unique powers or struggles. These are universal struggles. And that is yet another way in which we connect to others, is that we see that others are going through those same things. Anyway, and art can help us see that. And the other kind of like tangential thing to that is that I've talked to many artists who, you know, create these works and then they have to put them in a gallery to be sold. And it's like selling selling a piece of yourself. It's very difficult. Like you've labored and put your whole self into these works, and now somebody else is like gonna just give some money and take it and put it in their home, and nobody's ever gonna see it again, you know, other than them. So art, I find actually some weird beauty in that as well, that in that struggle and that expression of your humanity and how it connects to the universe and to the rest of us humans.
Definitely. So for the next question, yeah, Corey, thank you. That was the applause version of this. Yes. So yeah, next let's go to Dee. Go ahead, Dee.
Hi. Well, my question was oh, I'm trying to find it so I can read it. Oh, what does it do to art to have value given to what is popular rather than artistic value? And can I enlarge on that or just say the question?
No, please, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah.
Well, I've just been, I love design. I mean, it's just kind of a hobby, but you know, I read design books and a lot of interior design books. I don't know why, I do a lot of other art, but this is another thing I enjoy. But I've been noticing, like in the AD magazine, that there's this horrible, I mean, I shouldn't say that, I don't want to offend anybody, but the art I see in there, to me, is very peculiar, and they're always owned by the very, very rich that kind of go in this crowd. And I mean, I look at some of it, it's like a lot of volcanic stuff. I mean, it just simply, I'm sorry, that is not beautiful. They all have it. So I just wondered if you could address that issue of what's cool versus what feels like real art.
It's an interesting question. I don't think it's always the case that what's popular is always, you know, kind of like a low form of art. There's this kind of, you know, classical distinction between high art, low art, you know, opera versus 2.5 Men or something like that. But what's interesting, you know, if like think of Shakespeare, these are masterpieces that we still read today and study in high school and can study forever and still like learn from. But he was incredibly popular during his day. Like if Shakespeare were alive today, he'd be writing sitcoms. Probably not 2.5 Men, because that is not good art. but he would be writing maybe Frasier. That's a good sitcom. That's a good example. That's good art. No, but like to be that like they're overlapping circles. They're not totally like separate, like what's popular. I mean, it's definitely true that, you know, taste does vary, and Philippa was sharing with us that the people in positions of elite authority in the art world like to look down on everyone who's not in that world and not doing exactly what they think is you know, the best form of art and creating beauty. But yeah, it's an interesting question. Thank you, Dee.
Dee, also, I just want to go back to my rant about the elite art. Because I was reading this article in ArtNet a couple weeks ago about how, you know, all the sort of popular famous artists of the day, this was kind of focusing on that whole generation around Warhol and, you know, Studio 54 and all that. Like all of those artists were friends with each other. And so basically the ones who were popular were kind of all in the same clique. Like it didn't mean that they were the best artists. It meant that they knew the right people. They were hanging around in the right bars, going to the right dinner parties. That's why they were the popular artists. Not because, I mean, they weren't, I'm not making a judgment whether they were bad or good artists. It's just that there's certainly plenty of good artists out there who weren't in the cool kids clique. So I don't know, that's not art. It just underscores this idea for me of like, you know, just because you're popular doesn't mean you're the good artist.
Totally. Yeah. All right. Let's go to Heather. Go ahead and ask your question next. Also, I'm going to be a little, I think we'll get through more questioners. Philippa, why don't you take this one, and then Lexi, chime in with anything necessary, but I'm going to we'll try to go back and forth a little just to get through as many people as possible. Heather, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, April, since you are a poetry fan, I will say that I've had the Blake poem, The Tiger, in my head this entire time, and all of this sublime talk and fearful symmetry, and did he who make the lamb make thee, and all of that, and that aspect back to the religious art that Alexandra was talking about earlier. And I think I have a question related to not just symmetry as in, you know, is it political? Is it for pleasure? Is it this? Is it that? It's like, to what extent, in what particular context is it those things in tension with one another? And I think to the Brave Angels kind of take on all of this, it feels like there's something around that tension of like, what are we allowed to talk about? What are we allowed, like, what is the Overton window in the conversation? And is that conversation itself a form of beauty and creation and kind of generativeness? And so I'd just love to hear you guys talk a little bit more about that, as not just art as this thing that we present to start a conversation, which I also use as a tool as well, but also art, like the conversation as art, and that kind of beautiful generative spirit that you get when you're creating with other people.
Woohoo.
Okay.
If you're not a member of Brave Angels, we're going to recruit you. That was great. Philippa.
I love this question. So I started calling myself a social sculptor recently. I stole this term from Joseph Beuys, who was an artist in the 70s. And he said that he sculpted space for conversation, and that was his art. And the art could not be complete until conversations occurred in that space. And then not only that, but the conversations had to lead not only toward relationships, but also to actual action. And so kind of like building on this thing that you just said, Heather, around generative conversations. Like, it's all well and good to like have, this fun dialogue and, talk once, but it has to, the successful art piece for Just Voice was that there were continued dialogues that led to action. And so I've just been so excited when I discovered this idea that, the art piece is the conversation itself, the generative conversation itself. And so I've also, been thinking of art I've been expanding my definition of art. Like, again, a lot of times when we say art, we're like the thing that hangs on the wall. And, I love those things that hang on the wall, but at the end of the day, like, that for me is not the most important thing. The most important thing is the relationship that comes from that. The prioritizing of relationships that can lead to greater things. I thank you for asking that.
Yes, absolutely. Lexi, you can add a few things if you want, and then we'll move on.
No, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Also, Heather, seriously, like, fabulous question. And just personally, what?
I'm already a member, as Derek, yeah.
Okay, just checking. But also, like, I'm a big Niebuhr fan, and the idea that like politics is a competition between half truths, and that's the reason that I think conversation and debate can elevate people in much the same way art does, or in a way that is not totally separate from art. Yes, it pulls us all upwards. Thank you for that. Randy, familiar face. What's your question?
Yeah,
Lexi, we'll start with
folks,
you.
It's good to see all of you. And I actually have a question, a similar theme, and especially regarding what April just mentioned. I've been struggling with how to word this question because it's an idea that I've been gaining appreciation for recently. But people in political conversations also, often talk about their frustration with others ignoring facts. But we all get served different facts, right? So it can be really futile to try to share them, to fully share them. But when we focus on our emotional responses, they seem more universal, and they can also tell us a lot about how we're interacting with these issues. So, my question in general is, do you think that art has an ability to connect us more productively on many issues because of that?
I think the answer from both panelists will be no, but Lexi, you can start.
Oh, contraire, but go ahead.
So your question is, can art connect us better than conversation, than dialogue?
Yeah, in many instances, yeah, that's my thought.
I don't know if it has to be either or. Why not both and? Like that's kind of very much the ethos of what I understand Philippa's project to be. And that was very much the ethos of what our project was here in Indianapolis at the Harrison Center. Because we're not just heart and we're not just mind, we're all of it. We're not just body, we're not just spirit, we are mind, body, and spirit. So why not bring all of that, all those aspects of our humanity to bear on important things like the pursuit of truth and conversation and friendship and living the good life together in community, which is what what we're all trying to do here. That's kind of the project of human existence. And so I think it doesn't have to be either or, and in fact, they're incredibly complementary.
Philippa, yes, you can.
I want to add just a little nuance to that, because I am friends with Randy's brother, and he and I were arguing a couple nights ago, actually, because he is a very like rational, facts-oriented thinker, and I'm a very emotional person, and we were like, and so I was like, oh, I was like so mad at him. I wasn't really mad, of course, but the thing, so that kind of reminds me of this idea that there is actual social science research also around the idea that, and I think we know this intuitively, that facts don't matter. Facts don't change anybody's mind. And in fact, the more you throw facts at people, you could possibly push them further into their ideological corner. And in fact, that's what was happening with me and Randy's brother. I was like digging my heels in, and then he started digging his heels in. But I think where art plays into this is that, you know, art does evoke emotion, and it's in the emotions, that's in the raw emotion, the stories that we tell, those are the things that have been proven through social science to shift people, even microscopically. Facts do not shift people in the way that emotions can. And that's where art comes into play, I think. But to, you know, as Alexi said, it's not an either or to art and dialogue. Like art causes the dialogue that can help those things shift. It's just how we engage in that dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So we have 3 more, and I think we're there through all the questions. Daniel Messina, no more question from you?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So actually, I would like to address both Philippa and Alexandria. So here's my history. I have a master's degree in mathematics, but I started out in high school taking 4 electives in art. Basically, I took 4 years as an elective art, and I love art. So I straddle both realms, and so here's what I think art may be, and I want you to get your opinion on it. That art points to the transcendence over the chaotic, destructive, or that which is evil. It is a hope of achieving. It is a hope of achieving or reaching that transcendence. That's where the beauty lies. That is the beauty. That is which then implies. So beauty implies gratitude, which implies true happiness, and that's what art essentially is there to do. And then there's a unifying element to it, because all of us human beings need to strive to that ideal. So there's where the unifying element may be, and that common human element.
So go ahead, Lexi. Yeah, thoughts?
Yeah, I would, if I understand what you're saying, I would agree that the unifying aspect of art is our humanity. And in fact, like a phrase that we're familiar with, the liberal arts, that educational curricula and tradition incorporated geometry, astronomy, math, science, the natural world, like exploring biology, exploring the natural world, in addition to what we would consider squarely the humanities today, like literature, philosophy, things like that, because that was what it meant to be fully human. Like to Philippa's point about the book she was reading about range, which I haven't read it, but I think it's a defense for the liberal arts, is kind of providing that basis of that grounding of human knowledge to allow us to keep learning and growing and to continue to cultivate the fullness of our humanity and our potential as human beings. And I mean, the liberal arts doesn't mean political, like, you know, liberal conservative. It means liberating, because studying these arts is to be truly free, because true freedom consists in self-governance, like freedom from our passions, freedom from just being slaves to our emotions, that it's a balance, a rightly ordered soul. So yeah, I appreciated the question. Thank you.
Philippa, anything to add?
Lexi said it perfectly.
I know she does that. It's annoying. Sorry, Daniel, we're going to go ahead and move on. All right, Lawrence, you're next.
Yes, hello from Seattle. This is for Lexi. That near the beginning, she was talking about Sublime coming from fear or some connection from fear. Now, I have spent a lot of time in the national parks and outdoor, and felt a sublime. I'm not sure what the noun of sublime is. Sublimeness. Now there's a saying that fear of heights is what keeps mountain climbers alive, and the Sierra Club has their 10 essentials. So when you go out into the wilderness, so that you can be safe. But I just didn't really get, that did not resonate with me of a connection between sublime and fear. So can you say anything more about?
Absolutely. So I meant fear, and I think Burke meant fear in kind of the traditional sense. So it's like the book of Proverbs in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, says over and over and over, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of God, over and over and over. And the Proverbs doesn't mean like, you know, standing in fear and trembling and like terrified of like a God that's going to smite you. It means like just wonder and humility. And I think that's what fear in this sense mean as well. Like when you're just overcome by your smallness in relation to the greatness of space, or a mountain, or the Grand Canyon, or the ocean, the vastness of the ocean, just the mystery of the ocean, that it just makes you feel small and insignificant, like by just being confronted by this beauty and wonder of the universe. So not fear as in like, you know, you're under threat, or you are fearful for your life and existence, but fear in the sense of wonder and humility.
Okay. That resonates, that there's a component almost beyond your comprehension, but
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
All right, great. And Philippa, your blog is named Artisphere, so if you want to throw in something there, you can too.
Well, I wanted to tell Lawrence, like, you know, the way the social scientists in the studies that I mentioned define awe and wonder is exactly the same way Lexi just defined fear. So if it helps, you know, you can think about that, what she's saying, not as fear as awe. It's a positive emotion of like wonder of the world and your smallness in the world, but also feeling curious about knowing more.
Wonderful. Alrighty, for our final question of the evening, Diana, take us home.
Awesome, thank you for the opportunity. I have a quick question too. The quick one is, would you consider curating a book list, a bibliography for books on beauty? That would be super helpful. And I'd love the list that the two of you would come up with. And secondly, I've been thinking, for me, I have a relationship to art, and let me broaden that to include music, that is connected to pain and suffering. And so I think the same way that a human being experiences thirst, because we are, 75% water, and we need it. I think there is something telling about what you're drawn towards in art. Would you agree? And could you think about or expound on that? Because I know for me, it sometimes hurts so much that I have to separate myself and catch my breath. But I definitely have a visceral response to it.
Wonderful. Philippa, would you start us there?
Wow, it's deep. I was thinking about visceral responses, and you know, again, I love objects and things that hang on the wall, but the things I have shed tears when I've seen art, but more often when I feel art, and music has made me shed more tears than visual art ever has. And again, there's social science that actually underscores that music in particular can evoke those visceral reactions. There's this really famous visual artist named Marina Abramovich. And when she was asked that same question, she also said music. And so anyway, I don't know if that's answering your question exactly, but I'm just sort of affirming your gut instinct of music is a thing that can evoke the most amount of emotion. And I have felt it, and I've read social science that supports that.
Wonderful. Anything to add, Lexi?
Yes, really quickly to Diana's first question about a reading list. Yes, happy to. I always love reading, and so I love to share what I love with other people. And I hope you, Diana, and anyone else still on this call will consider subscribing to Civic Renaissance. Would be thrilled to have you as part of the community. But in addition to a reading list, I would encourage you to, as Philippa said, art is something to be experienced. This has been a recurring theme, and so instead of a reading list, or maybe in conjunction with a reading list, a visiting list. Where do you live, and like what are the museums in your area that you can go? And it doesn't even have to be a museum. It could just be, what are the wonders of the natural world, because there are wonders of the natural world all around us, like whether we're in the big city or in the mountains. I grew up in Vancouver, Canada, and I miss the mountains so much. I haven't been there. I've been on a plane since, over a year now, and I can't wait to go back and just kind of stare at the mountains and the vistas, because my soul yearns for that. I miss that. But that doesn't mean that there aren't beautiful things here in Indianapolis for me to enjoy. Far from it. But I think part of it is like cultivating the disposition of seeing the beauty around us and being present where we are. And I think that's both, the first step to identifying and appreciating beauty, and to also leading more meaningful lives that, again, fill us up and allow us to bring more grace and charity to our everyday, which, to the theme of our entire conversation tonight, is where I think beauty and art has incredible power to heal our divides.
Yeah, one thing I just want to throw in finally there, and then we'll wrap up, is Diana, I could not agree more with what you're saying about suffering. And the only answer that I've ever found remotely sufficient, I spent a long time in a religious search, it's a whole story, but one of the problems I had was that I could never find a good answer for evil and just the awful things that happen in the world. And the best answer I ever heard was musical. It was that there is something about beauty that speaks deeply to those things, and that there can be an answer found there when there isn't one in logic. And so I just I love what you're saying, and my heart feels it deeply. So on that, I really feel like we could stay here for another 4 hours, but and still have a lot to talk about. But for the moment, Lexi and Philippa, I know all of us, in addition to reading your bibliography that will come around. And by the way, Lexi, I hope that it includes plenty of first century speakers whose names are things like Longinus. I don't know anybody else who can quote those people so well. We want to follow you. So Lexi, you just mentioned Civic Renaissance. If you could share just like the links are in the chat, folks, and how we can follow you, that would be great. And then Philippa will come to you.
Thank you, April. So Civic Renaissance is a newsletter and intellectual community that I founded and curate that attempts to use ideas and storytelling and reporting to recover and elevate our public discourse and heal our deeply divided moment. And so that's and doing so by cultivating a love of beauty, goodness, and truth, and using the wisdom of the past to kind of bring clarity to our moment. It's easy to feel like we're in the worst moment, and that it's never been as bad, but that's not true, because human nature doesn't change. And so it can be comforting to know that we've been here before many times, and hope to just bring a little bit more clarity and hope to our conversation.
Wonderful. And Philippa, how can we follow your every word and move?
Well, I love social media, so following me on social media is it's probably the best way. But I would love, and as we continue to organize these conversations around art and in museums and cultural spaces, always looking for people across the country to participate. So if anybody is ever interested in that, that kind of framing around a cross-political conversation, would love to have you. And I'm very easy to find on all the channels. So Love that.
Excellent, excellent, great. And so just before you go, I would like you to know that there is a new surprise treat for all of you, which is a new APF that has just come on the calendar for Friday. APF being America's Political Forum, what we're doing right now. Luke, tell us about that.
Sure thing. So yesterday I got a random call from an editor in Washington, D.C. who had secured former governor of Minnesota, Tim Pawlenty, to do a conversation about various things, but one of which was going to be the events of 2020 in Minneapolis and in Minnesota and across the country, relating to the issues of race and policing and the various conversations and controversies that have been up over that. As those of you who've been following Braver Angels have known, we have been looking very intensively at those and doing a lot of programming, especially last summer. And we are honored to be working with our friends at American Purpose magazine to be doing a conversation with the former governor of Minnesota to talk about what that looked like in his state, and what that will look like for the future of this particular important set of issues. So Braver Angels is co-host for that. John Wood Jr. will be one of the MCs for that conversation. So he'll be there for that. I'll be there in the backdrop doing some behind the scenes Zoom stuff. And if you want to see a conversation in this same sort of format with the former governor of Minnesota about some of the issues that, as this week has already shown, are still live and still crucial and still important, and we still need to do the right sorts of discourse on them, you are very welcome to join us this Friday at noon Eastern time. The registration on it is a little bit complicated, so when you go on the Eventbrite page, which I have just shared, and you might be receiving it in a Braver Angels email sometime in the next 24 hours or so. Just make sure to go to the Zoom registration on it. It's different than we normally do it for the APFs because it's a partnered thing. So apologies on that, but we'd love to see you there. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's an important thing to say, and I think this is also the first APF that has had a former presidential candidate as the guest, which I'm not exactly sure how it's going to go, but I'm excited to see if we can work it out. So, and also it will have a potential future presidential candidate as one of the hosts as well too. So you'll get to see him talk as well. So, all right, in the meantime, looking forward to seeing you all for future ones in April. Let me send it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. One more round of jazz hands just for our spectacular team who put this on tonight. Luke and Elizabeth and Dennis, thank you so much. And Lexi and Philippa, this has been, it's funny, Heather mentioned conversations that are elevating. This is, I feel elevated by this. And I'm just grateful to both of you for being with us and sharing your wisdom and your presence. And I am also just delighted to be here with all of you. I imagine, a lot of you have already joined our Braver Angels family, but if you haven't, come join us. braverangels.org, it's in the chat. We would love to continue these conversations. And so without further ado, I know that everybody has to, get to bed if you're on the East Coast and get to dinner if you're on the West Coast. And so thank you so much. And yeah, good night to all of you.